Okay, welcome back for beginners tutorials of 3ds Max. This time what we're going to have a look at is the second toolbar across the top. We had a look at some previously, but this time I want to sort of go through the lot to really sort of explain what they do and how they work with some of the creation tools. So if we work from left to right, and then what I can do is sort of give you an outlook on what some of the toolbar does. Okay, so first of all on the left we have the undo and the redo. Basically that's like your edit undo and edit redo that you'd have in many other programs. They only go back so far, so don't rely on them fully too much. It's always best to save in iterations. So first of all, since as I've just mentioned that, I might as well show you how to save. When you go up to the top here on the first toolbar, if we click onto the Max logo, and then we've got the save options. Now what I prefer to do is press save as, and then add an iteration for whatever you're going to call your file, and add an iteration each time on which I save, because then what happens is it allows you to go back, and when you're allowed to go back it means that you can make mistakes in certain save files, but you can always have sort of like a fallback where you can go to where you had the model previously, and this really sort of helps when you're creating sort of really high detailed models that you may or may not have want the detail of, or you may have messed up or something along those lines. It's something really easy to sort of implement within your workflow. Okay, so the first two, as we said, edit, undo, redo. Across from that we've got select and link. Now what this one does, it allows you to link two objects together. So what we're going to do is just create two boxes like we've done before really quickly. What it enables us to do with this select tool is link one to the other. Now what this allows us to do is to create a parent-child relationship. Now what that means is that when the parent moves, the child moves with it, but when the child moves, the parent doesn't necessarily move with the child. That's the relationship that happens within 3ds Max. Usually this relationship works really well with sorts of things like bone structures, or creating rigs for characters, or moving things as a group. Usually this works quite well with it because it allows you to move a set of objects rather than just the one. Next to that you've got the Unlink Set Selection. So if we just press that, now what we'll find is that there's no longer a link between the two of them. What we've got here, we broke the link, so we'll see that neither of them are linked any further. Next to that we've got a bind space warp. Now this is for things such as particle effects. We're not really going to get to that for a little while yet, so bear in mind for later on. Next we've got the selection tool, so you get to select different things that are in your scene. Like if I select warps, it won't allow me to select anything but warps. There's none in there at the scene at the minute, so we need to change that back to select all or geometry. The geometry would allow us to select the geometry, and all will allow us to select everything. On the right of that we've got the select object tool, so any object that's within your scene you'll be able to just select that. Now what it will allow you to do is not manipulate the object but just select it. To the right of that we've got select by name. Now in here we've got the two boxes that we've just created. Now if I want box 2, I can select and click box 2 and it will allow me to select that. It works with a lot of objects, as this one, so it's quite easy to find something that you may have a lot of objects in one scene, so making it easier to really locate something. Okay. Next of all we've got the selection region. Now if we click and hold the left click, what it allows us to do is change the shape of when we click and drag a select with your left click. I usually keep mine on the box shape or rectangular one, but it's up to you. Next one is the Windows crossing. So what that allows us to do is to change this so that it's either going to be within the middle of the object or not. It really doesn't make much difference. Next to it we've got the move tool. So if we select and use the move tool, It allows us to use this move tool that we did with the coordinates previously. Next to it we have the select and rotate. Now it allows us to do is rotate things in either direction. As I said before, Control Z to undo, or the edit undo button for when you do it. The select uniform scale, this allows us to rescale an object. However, it doesn't change the parameters that I showed you previously. Can you see when I resize the object, the parameters remain the same. So if you're trying to keep an object to the same unit scale, you really want to make sure that you're changing it within the parameters instead of in here. Next of all, we've got the select and place. Now this one allows us to move it into a specific place. It's quite useful when you want to put objects on top of each other. It allows us to see that it's directly placed on top. This helps whenever you're doing sort of things that involve animations, really. Next of all, we've got the reference coordinate system options. Now, as you can see, when we've got the move tool on, what it allows us to do is to select the way in which you would like to manipulate the object. Now this is going to become a bit more apparent later on. It allows us to change objects in different ways, so this is something for you to look at perhaps when you're moving a set of vertices that are maybe angulared, so that you want them to carry on moving along the angle rather than up and down within the usual Z, Y or X axis within the world. Now at the moment, because we are just using the world, you can see that the Z axis is up, X and Y are side to side. You'll see the difference later on when you come to start using editable poly and changing and manipulating objects. Use pivot point center allows us just to select the pivot point and place it directly to the center of the object. So if we select this one at the moment, you see that the placement of the pivot totally changes with the object. We want to keep it within the center as much as possible. Select and manipulate is something that's used more for helpers, really. It allows you to manipulate the object and move that manipulator around, because manipulators or helpers within your scene don't necessarily allow you to move them because they're not geometry or objects. So when you need to manipulate that, you have to go and select it within the select and manipulate options. Now I just showed you some of the tools for the move, the rotate and the rescale. Next to this one, what we've got here, the keyboard shortcut override, which always we want to keep on because we want to make sure that we can have shortcuts on, is the snaps toggle. Now if we right click the snaps toggle, it gives us some options of where we would like to use the snaps settings. Basically within here, what it allows you to do is snap the object to certain places. So for instance, this grid that we've got below here, it allows us to snap to the grid point, or that we can snap to a pivot, a perpendicular, a vertex, an edge, a face, many of the different options. Usually I keep mine clicked on vertex and grid points, because what it allows me to do is to move an object to a certain vertex on the screen. Now a vertex is a point in which the tries meet up. So as we can see on the top of this object, we've got a quad because it's a four-sided object, but we've got two tries. But these two tries have three different vertexes. Now these corners of the object are what referred to as vertexes. As we've only got the one segment on each of them, they will be the individual vertices. Now if we change this, it'll add vertices within the middle of the object as well. So it's important to notice this. When we turn this on, the snaps toggle, we left click it, you can see that this little sort of crosshair turns up. When we select over it and click, you see that there's like an anchor type arrow. What it allows us to do is then to move that object into the position that you would like on the grid point, or if you've got it selected to vertices, we just remove the grid point. What we'll see is that it allows us to snap it to a certain vertex on here. It's a lot more useful when it comes around to manipulating objects within editable poly and editable mesh. Next of all, what we've got, if we left click on the angle snap, is that it will rotate the object in 5-degree iterations. Now can you see at the bottom here we've got the angle of motion in that certain axis. Now it's quite easy to now see how much we've actually changed the angle. So there's the angle snap for the rotation. Now next to it we've got percentage snap. This is quite useful for when we are in scale. If we left click this one, we see at the bottom again where we located the coordinates, it changes the percentage of the scale. Now on the left we can see that it's 170% of the original size. If we change this back to 100, you can see that we change it back to its original size. Now next to here we have this spinner snap toggle. Now this helps us when we're using any parameter changes. So if we've got these toggles, it allows us to keep them at a full percentage. This wouldn't be able to happen if we were to use it before. It'd be 0.1. So it allows us to remain a whole unit when we're changing these. Now these are edit name by sets. You can change the name of the objects. Now this is a mirror tool, which allows us, when we select the mirror tool, to mirror the object's position. So if we wanted to mirror it with a clone, we can actually copy the object as well. And we want to put it perhaps in the y-axis. What we can do is move that, and we've got another object. So if we mirror this without the copy and change it in the z-axis, we can see that it changes where the object is going to be located, or how it looks. Now there's another way of doing this that's a lot more beneficial when you're 3D modelling. We're going to find this out a little bit later on. It's called symmetry, so keep that and bear it in mind. Next to it we've got the align tool. Now the align tool will enable us to be able to align a certain object to a certain part of the coordinates really. So if we wanted to select it to the X position of this, we can now see that it allows us to select this object but align it to the coordinates of this object. So if we do that again, to align it to that object, y-axis, turn off the x-axis, I'm going to turn it and put it on the z-axis. We can see that when we do the changes to it that we've done previously, it will move where the object is. Okay. Next to it we've got manage layers. Now layers are quite important when you get further and further on, because it allows you to put things into certain groups. If we open the layer manager, what it allows us to do is to place certain objects within layers. So if we give this one, select these two objects and say we want to create it as a new layer, because at the moment everything's on the same layer. So what we're going to do is on here click these two, and what we have is allows us to customize them, edit them, display and select. So at the moment we haven't got any that we can change, so what we want to do is to create a new group. So what we're going to do is we are going to select the object, go into tools, we've got the manage layers open with another way of directing you into there. Also